Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Hey guys, I'm Marc Mandel. Welcome to the very first episode of a brand new show here called Customer Experience Unsung Heroes. I'm so thrilled that you're here with me, and we're going to have a fun 20 or so minutes while we're together in this conversation. Let me take a moment, because this is a brand new show, to talk about the show and why I chose to share that Apple ad a moment ago with you. You know, I think about the work that we do in customer or employee or both experience management. I don't care if we're a big company or a small company. There's so many people who are doing work in this space that are what I'm going to keep calling unsung heroes. The people who are doing the hard work, making it work, pushing things forward for their respective companies and the people that they serve. But they never have an opportunity, or rarely do they have an opportunity, to come to the spotlight, to really kind of get a little bit of public accolades for the work that they're doing. And that's okay with most of them, because they feel like they really are having the impact that they want to make. But all that said, I thought, wouldn't it be cool to take a handful of these folks that I think are some of the best in the business, but people who rarely get out in front of the big spotlight, and give them an opportunity and a platform here on this show just to have a conversation about the things that we're all so passionate about, and to introduce themselves to you and hopefully you back to them. This is just that show. This is not going to be a sales pitch show for products or services. This is going to not be even an interview show. We're going to do this show a few times a month, and I'm going to have a conversation with one person on the client side, a customer or employee experience practitioner who's doing some of that amazing work, but who rarely gets to get, noticed for it. Today's episode, the first episode of our Unsung Heroes, is going to be just that. I've asked my good friend Dan Comenduley from US Cellular to join me on this, and he'll pop in here in just a moment. But before I bring Dan on, I thought I would just take a moment just to talk about why I picked that 1-minute Apple advertisement as the lead-in to this show. And it's not just because I'm an Apple fan, and I absolutely am an Apple fan. But that aside, I think the message in that advertisement about people who do certain things, that people are change agents. People are out there saying, you know what? Just because we've always done things a certain way, that's no longer good enough to keep doing them that way, and let's change it up because there's a way to do things better. It's kind of like the quote, if you think back to the Henry Ford quote, when he said, if you ask customers what they wanted, they would be asking for a faster horse, while he was out there advocating to build cars. And I think we as CX people and insight research people and EX people, we believe we're out there for doing many of us, maybe not all of us in this business, but many of us in this business do what we do for a profession because we think we're part of the machine whose job it is to make things better. And that's why, at least speaking for myself, what motivates me to keep doing the work that I do. And I think that's what came through with some of those amazing people in that Apple ad. Just as an aside, the 1-minute clip of that Apple ad that I showed you here, it's special. And what makes it special, that if I don't know how many of you remember when that ad ran on television, because it was almost 20 years ago at this point that ad ran in prime time. But that said, imagine what makes that ad a little bit different than the one that ran on television. And if you guys have access to the comment screen on the side, if any of you know the clip that I showed, what made it different than the national ad that eventually ran, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about what you think it is, because it is a little bit of a trivia question to that. Well, while you're thinking through that, let me take a moment and bring on my friend, Dan Comenduley. So Dan, I'm going to ask you to join me on stage here.
Glad to be here.
Hey, Dan, thanks for being here. Dan, we're going to sit and have about a 10 or 15-minute chat, you and I, about the work that we do and love. But it dawns on me that some of my friends who might be out there listening into either this live show or picking it up on a recording afterward may not know who Dan Comenduley is. Can you just take a moment and just tell us a little bit about you, kind of where you came from, what you're doing, and kind of things that motivate you as a person, so that we could just make sure that we know who you are?
Yeah, I think the way that I like to think of it is that I'm a dreamer who wants to understand my customers. And the big thing for me has been having that opportunity in a lot of different places. Career basically started at Philip Morris in New York, working on tobacco. And I've gone through a few different places along the way: Pillsbury, United Airlines, Discover Card, Synchrony, Quill.com, and now I am currently at US Cellular. My passion is for understanding customers, and I've got a couple of things that I think about with every project that I approach. And dreaming of what that next step is means approaching a project maybe a little differently than other people. But my approach is always something that I think a bunch of people have heard: what, so what, now what? And a lot of times that what, you have to think of a different way of getting to what is the thing you're finding out about customers. It might have to combine different things, whether it's, the business press, or it might be focus groups that you have, surveys, might even be listening to the phone into the customer care center, checking out what we're getting as far as some of the chat bots, those different things. Because to me, the big thing is we all hear about everybody sitting on a big pile of data. And I would argue that the overwhelming majority of that data is not the data that the customer cares about.
Interesting.
Or that will help you move to that next phase. And having that opportunity for the customer to say in their own words what's going on. And I would add, with focus groups, their own body language, that you can really learn a lot more by giving them the opportunity to tell you something. We all have surveys that have specific objectives, but one of the things I learned at United Airlines that helped us a lot, not only with learning new things, but just getting better response rates, was in the invite saying, we're going to give you a chance to talk about what you want to, along with what we want to find out. And it's that piece of the learning that leads you to other ideas, other thinking. My first boss at Philip Morris said the best research is something that gives you more questions than it answers. And I'm a firm believer that if you do the research right, you do your investigations right, you're going to learn so much more, and you may even be more confused than you ever were. But the fact is, you're on a better path to really understanding that consumer and being able to give them the experience that they're looking for.
Interesting. You're bringing up so many important points in just your thoughts there. Thank you for sharing that. And a couple of those big points that I hear really stand out for me are the following. And I want you to kind of react to them if we can. The first one is this idea that so many people who we still rely on surveys, to whatever extent we rely on surveys as one of our main kind of feedback modes out there. So many surveys are framed as, tell us about us. And the reality is, wouldn't it be more relevant to the customer and maybe more helpful to us if we framed it more as, tell us about you? Because people inherently are more psychologically interested in telling people about themselves than about the company who they just transacted with. right? However, they would tell you about themselves in the context of the company or the transaction. So it's the subtle flip from the tell us about us to tell us about you.
Well, think about the stories that you hear that are the hero stories wherever you're at.
Sure.
The stories are not brand X did this for me,
Mm-hmm.
or rarely are, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Having worked at United Airlines, the stories that were really the ones you remember always were on this amazing trip that I had, on my chance to cross something off my bucket list, whatever it might be. It always starts with the customer, not with the brand or the company.
Yep.
And in a lot of places, sometimes we think the other way around and we get good insights. But the insight that the customer wants to tell us starts with the point of view of them, not the company.
Yep. Can you share a thought on kind of how you see the balance or the importance of a balanced quant qual type of feedback? And what I'm getting at is, so we're talking about here, if we really want to cast a wide net in the feedback that we're getting about a type of experience, is that harder to truly be arm's length from that experience in a quant environment where we could be more easily focusing on that in a qual environment? Talked about, for me, a lot of surveys that I see kind of lead the witness. They tend to say, tell me how you score this, and it's only what's important to the company, right? As opposed to, there's a company that I'm a fan of. It's a technology company. I have no affiliation with them, but I'm a fan of theirs. They're called 37 Signals. They're based in Chicago. They make a product that you guys may have heard of called Basecamp. It's a project management software tool for small companies. And they had a podcast of their own that I was listening to recently as a fan of theirs. And the CEO was talking about the best survey he ever saw, and was literally a blank sheet of paper with the instruction of tell us what you want to tell us. Right? It could be a word, it could be a comment, it could be a number, it could be whatever they want. It's just cast that wide net. And then we as the company take the responsibility of deciphering what's out there. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, there's one project design that I've always wanted to try that I haven't heard of anyone doing it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And I refer to it as the Oprah sessions.
What's that?
Your person on stage is a higher level executive or your CEO. You fill the audience as kind of a dinner, get to meet, ask questions kind of thing to get them to come in. And they're your audience. And you have an Oprah, you have a moderator who's a person with the microphone going to people throughout the room. And you let them ask the questions they want to ask, because they're not going to waste their time asking you stuff that doesn't matter to them.
Sure.
They're going to tell you, I wish you would fix this, or I had this experience. The things that come out of that, we used to do online chats when I was at United as part of our online community.
Sure.
And the stuff that we get when you give people the freedom to pick what direction they want to go. Now, obviously, some people with their titles, for example, we did one that was IT based because we had the IT vice president there. Still, they went in a lot of different directions within that space. That's okay to kind of rein them in a little bit on a topic. But the fact is, similar to your blank sheet of paper example, the fact is you don't know what direction they're going to go. And the thing that is of value to them, they're talking to somebody who's high enough to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a win-win situation that you're getting the type of feedback that you don't ordinarily get. You may get some with some of the customer care lines and things like that, but you're really going to get some new thoughts and new directions that maybe you hadn't considered because the customer is dictating what's being talked about, not the company.
Interesting. Some of you guys listening in here have heard me tell this story before, but I think what Dan's talking about bears repeating here. And I hold my phone up to the camera for just a moment to tell a story. there's an acronym with them. What's in it for me? If I'm the customer, the consumer, the respondent, the participant, whatever label you want to put on me, there has to be a sense of value, kind of reciprocal value for investing time and even sharing meaningful feedback. And I don't mean you're going to pay me for my time. I don't mean you have to give me a gift card or an honorarium of some type. That's neither here nor there. I talked about in the beginning of this show my sense of feeling like I'm an Apple promoter. I'm an Apple fan. In fact, all the tech stuff in my entire house is Apple gear and Apple software everywhere I look. And I'm not saying that because I want Apple to give me free stuff, but I wish they would. What this is, when I bought the most recent iPhone, I went to the store at the mall. I bought the phone, cost an arm and a leg to buy the phone. And, literally they sent me the Medallia survey 39 seconds after I stepped out of that transaction. Right. And I said, I'm a survey guy, at least partly. I'm going to go take the survey and take a look at it. Because I was intrigued because it came so quickly. And so I took it on my phone when I was standing in the mall. And it was like nearly 30 questions long, first of all, which is bananas, in my opinion, on a mobile survey, but neither here nor there. But instead of giving Apple the super high grades that I felt that they normally deserve, I said, I'm going to really toy with these guys a little bit. And I gave them on all the Likert scale questions, I gave them 1s and 2s and 3s. Nothing much got higher than a 3. And I kind of bounced around, so I wasn't straight lining it, so it didn't step out as looking like a fraudulent response. Got to the open-ended comments. I talked about the guy in the store was being a little short-tempered with me. Very clear, cry out for attention and help. I submitted the survey at the bottom of the screen after 5 or 10 minutes of working through it. And the screen cleared off and it just said, "We appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much. Have a good day." And there was no acknowledgement, manual or systematic in any way, shape, or form, or any sense of "we're sorry we messed up," or "go back to the store and see Roger. He's the manager. He'll hook you up." Nothing. There was no sense of being heard. And for me, the what's in it for me would have only been, I want to be heard. I want you to listen to me. Right? I want to feel like I have a voice. They call it the voice of the customer. I want that voice to be heard. Otherwise, why am I doing this? And what would be for me wasn't even the audience of Apple. It was feeling like if I took the time to say the experience was substandard for me, that you're going to take the time to close the loop and potentially help course correct my situation, my personal situation. But Apple chose not to. They collected my data. They may have analyzed me till the cows come home, but there was never any further communication. To the point where I said to my wife later that day, A, I thought they blew it. And B, why would I ever again take their survey the next time it comes? If I didn't hear her, I didn't feel like I was being heard this time. Dan, what are your thoughts about literally connecting with people in that kind of personalized way? Kind of ask you around situational feedback. It could come from a customer or from the market as a whole. How do you make a respondent feel heard?
A lot of it depends on how I got the data. So, for example, I'm a big believer in online communities, and I've run 3 different ones, 2 from financial services and 1 for United.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, a lot of it, as far as making them feel heard, is having that presence, responding to a comment that they have. That's the easy one, because it's smaller number of people that you've got something right there.
Sure.
As far as surveys go, so where you can now, one of the things you always have to balance is the expense that's associated with it. But having rules in place is saying, if your score is this on a particular question or whatever else, it's an automatic email. If it's this,
Mhm.
it's automatically somebody's calling you.
Yep.
There are different organizations that pride themselves on having executives who respond to whatever mail comes in or customer care issues or whatever else. And I think that's the kind of thinking that helps a full organization respond as best they can. And there's going to be difficult situations to try to make that happen. But one of the things that I feel like happens is when you think about whatever becomes a big news story or whatever, becomes, the next TikTok video or whatever else that everybody wants to see, when it relates to business, most of the time it's about how an employee went out of their way to make sure an experience was great,
Yep.
or that somebody really heard what was said and showed up with handling things.
Yep.
You may have seen the streaming TV show Bear. They talked about they had parts of it where one of the restaurants would go out of their way to look at social media to find out stuff about the person to make that experience so much more personal.
Yep.
Smaller sample, smaller number of customers, it's easier. But in a bigger company, it can be done too when you have different situations where it's not just by the book responses. It's not just thank you for your survey. You can say that, which is, I think, a great first step. If you actually had an automated thing that said, thank you for your response, that
Yep.
isn't lost at the end of a survey. I mean, I can't think of a time where I wrote a survey that I didn't have the thank you on the end of the survey, but it's online. So, maybe it doesn't come across as much. If it's something that we really want somebody's response to, or is a certain situation that we really need to make sure we talk about, reaching out to the customer and just saying, we appreciate it.
Yep.
I could think of times with staying at hotels where there were, hotels in odd places that I got emails the next day after we checked out saying, thank you for your response. Thank you for staying with us. I mean, it could be one or the other. Sometimes I haven't even taken the survey yet.
Yep.
It's just it's that mindset. You're not always going to have a chance to reach out to everybody. But if you have that mindset of valuing the customer's time, valuing the customer's thoughts, opinions, experiences, and dreams, that's the best thing you can do to create a voice of the customer program that's going to have an impact.
Interesting. So let me be a little controversial for a moment. What are your thoughts, Dan, about, or have you ever seen an example of a company, the ones that you've been part of or ones that you're aware of, where they ran a survey, they learned stuff from the feedback, and then they published out to their audience, to their external stakeholders out there, here's a report or a summary of all the stuff we learned, and here's the stuff we're going to do about it. So like turning these internal findings into external, almost like a guaranteed playbook, like as a way to acknowledge, but at scale, all the kind of the interesting learnings that came out of that study. Have you ever seen a company where they're willing to kind of open that kimono and say, this is all the stuff he told us, and these are the 3 or 4 things we're going to work on priority for us?
Well, when I was at United, we did that with our online community.
Okay.
And when I was at Discover Card, the online community we had there, part of it because it was innovation based,
Sure.
in the specific areas that we were going on, same thing. I think about companies that have a letter from the CEO that somewhere in the first 2 or 3 sentences say, "We heard you."
Yes.
Usually there is something that is responded to by them in that email that says, "You told us we need to be better at this. This is what we're doing."
Yep.
That's the kind of thing that I think fits really nicely when you can do it. Now, part of it too is the personality of the company. Some companies are not as open or as consumer centric to do that as others. And that's part of how business works. That's not a slight on anybody who doesn't do it.
Yeah.
But it always feels better when you can say, you know what? they're listening to their customers. And I think
Exactly.
that most people feel that way. Even if it's a brand that they don't use, um, it just builds more of that goodwill that I think everybody's looking for.
I agree. You know, I want to be mindful of our friends' time who's listening here. So I'm gonna ask you only one more thing to think about. And it's a big thing. And that is, you've had a hell of a career, right? You look back in the companies you've been part of over the years. You talked about being in the airline business, the tobacco business, the e-commerce, office equipment and supplies business. Now you're in the mobile phone, carrier business. Is there something that you could look back on in your recent work? I don't mean just in the current job, but even the past couple of jobs, that you say, boy, when I was just getting started, I would have given anything to know that thing, that little nugget that I've somehow learned recently. But I wish I knew it 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was the junior guy just kind of coming in. What kind of thing could you point at, if anything, that kind of anecdotally you've learned along the way about the work you do or the type of work that you do that you wish you would have given your arm for all that time ago, that would have pointed you for better, faster success?
Well, there's so many of them that I feel like I could fill in that space with, but I'm going to go with one of my favorite quotes that I apply to my job. And it may seem strange, but it's from Roddy Piper, pro wrestler. Just when they think they have the answers, I change the questions. And that's what consumers do. And if you think in terms of that with your projects, if you think of that in terms of what you're asked to do, if you think of it in terms of the insights that you generate, don't be ready to settle with what the first face value thing is, because how people think, how they feel is ever changing. And consumers' trends, you can think about what might have been a trend 10 years ago that aren't anymore. You could think about business trends that maybe it's just got a different phrase on it, but the buzz phrase seems to be a little bit different. The thing is, the landscape never is static. And if you think about it in different ways and different approaches for the projects that you're doing as well, knowing the basics is great, but sometimes you need to go and step outside of what is the conventional way of doing things to get the real answers that you want, just because of the nature of what you're trying to find out.
Fascinating. I never imagined you were going to answer my question in the context of professional wrestling. I think that's amazing. I grew up as a kid who loved professional wrestling watching. So thank you for making it fun and relatable for me. Dan, how could our friends find you if they want to talk to you more or kind of continue the conversation directly with you? How do they find you?
LinkedIn is the best place, and would love to talk to anybody as far as different things, even just to try to, brainstorm or, try to find different ideas or different ways to approach or different things to consider. I love hearing other perspectives because I know mine, but I don't know all of them. So the more that I can learn from somebody else or talk through different ideas, the better I like it. And LinkedIn would be the best place to start that conversation.
And where's home for you these days? The Chicago area?
Yeah, I'm about 45 minutes outside of Chicago. So if you think of it as going from downtown to O'Hare and you take that distance again, that's pretty close to where I'm at.
That's a great part of the country, in my opinion, 9.5 months a year. Us thin-skinned Southerners these days find the cooler months to be a little too cool by you, but it's beautiful most of the rest of the time. Dan, thank you for making the time to hang out with our friends and me on this brand new show. And friends, thank you for being part of this journey with Dan and me on this episode. We're going to be trying to do this type of show where folks like Dan come along and hang out with us for 15 or 20 minutes as often as we can. And we're building a good roster of folks who, like Dan, have a point of view and have been there and who have done it. And I'm looking forward to continuing this show with you long into the future. So, Dan, thank you for being the guy brave enough to say, I'll come on the first one and we'll figure this out together. So thank you so much for doing that. It means a lot that you're here with me and with my friends on this program. So thank you for being
Well, thank
here.
you for having me. I really appreciate the chance to just talk about what's going on.
Thanks. And guys, we're going to wrap up this show here by just saying thank you to you too. Thank you for being here on this CX Unsung Heroes. In many cases, I'll say this on my way out of this conversation, that you guys for coming on this journey are my unsung heroes for today. Thank you for being here with Dan and with me, and we're looking forward to seeing you again soon enough. Until then, since today is Halloween, at least in the United States, happy Halloween, guys. Don't eat too much candy. It's bad for you, but enjoy it nevertheless. And we'll see you soon. Take care, guys, and thank you. Bye-bye now.